1 month to love you. I should never have come to this party. Clara had begged me to accompany her. A private party in a luxurious mansion, exclusive guests, unlimited cocktails. She said it was the event of the year. I wasn't convinced, but I eventually gave in. From the moment I arrived, I knew something was off. The atmosphere was heavy. Everyone seemed on edge. As if behind the laughter and alcohol, a secret lurked. And then he appeared. A man stood at the top of the staircase, towering over the crowd with undeniable authority. He was tall, sculpted like a marble statue, dressed in a black suit that seemed tailor-made for his imposing silhouette. But what struck me the most was his gaze. Cold, calculating, dangerously intense. He scanned the room like a king surveying his subjects. Then his dark eyes landed on me. A shiver ran down my spine. I turned away, trying to ignore the strange sensation, the invisible weight pressing down on me under his gaze. Clara pulled me toward the bar, but I couldn't shake the feeling of his presence like a shadow lurking behind me. I should have left then. When I met his gaze a second time, I knew I had just made a fatal mistake. Everything happened too fast after that. A strong hand grabbed my arm as I headed toward the bathroom. Before I could scream, something covered my mouth. A sweet scent, immediate dizziness, then nothing. I woke up in an unfamiliar place. My heart pounded wildly as I slowly regained consciousness. I was lying on a king-size bed with silk sheets in an oversized bedroom. Massive wooden furniture, an imposing chandelier, a bay window revealing the night sky. I was no longer at the party. A shiver ran through me when I heard a sound. He was there, sitting in an armchair across from me, Raphael. I watched him, breath hitching. He didn't move, but his gaze was fixed on me. Burning. Dangerous. You're finally awake. His voice was deep, hypnotic. Why? My voice trembled. He stood up, slowly approaching the bed. Because I chose you. I clutched the sheets against me. Let me go. He tilted his head slightly as if amused. No. The word fell like a guillotine. I scrambled to my feet, ready to run, but in an instant he was on me. His hand closed around my wrist, pinning me against the wall. His warm breath brushed my skin, and I shivered despite myself. Too close. Too intense. You have 1 month to fall in love with me. I swallowed hard. And if I refuse? His smile widened slightly, a dark gleam in his eyes. Then you'll leave, free. My heart skipped a beat. I won't force you, he continued, whispering against my cheek. But trust me, in a month, you won't want to leave. He stepped back, leaving me disoriented, my body burning from the intensity of his presence. 1 month. 30 days before I either fell or fled. I remained frozen against the wall, breathing erratically. Raphael had just released me, but his gaze never left mine. I was both terrified and furious. Do you seriously think I'll fall in love with a man who kidnapped me? I spat. He smirked, a slow, controlled, arrogant smile. You'd be surprised. He walked away, heading toward the minibar near the bay window. He poured himself a glass of amber whiskey, took a sip, then turned back to me. Make yourself at home, Isabella. I flinched. How do you know my name? I know everything about you. A chill ran down my spine. You can't force me. I won't force you at all. He stepped closer again, slowly, like a predator savoring the moment its prey realizes it's trapped. You have 1 month, Isabella. I'll give you a reason to stay. He brushed his fingers against my cheek, and despite myself, my heart pounded. And when the time comes, it'll be you begging not to leave. I shoved his hand away with force. You're insane. Perhaps. Amusement flickered in his eyes, but I'm patient. Then he turned and left the room, leaving me alone with my ragged breathing and the certainty that I had just fallen into a game far more dangerous than I had imagined. The storm raged outside. The wind howled against the windows, the rain hammered the terrace. I couldn't sleep. I paced my room, trying to ignore the relentless pounding of my heart every time I thought of him. Then the door opened. I froze. Raphael entered without a word. He wore dark dress pants, his white shirt slightly unbuttoned. He was soaked, as if he had just walked through the storm. What are you doing here? I asked. my voice more unsteady than I wanted. He didn't answer. He stepped forward. His dark eyes gleamed with an intensity I understood too late. In a swift motion, he pinned me against the wall. "Stop running from me, Isabella." His breath was warm, laced with whiskey and something deeper. "I'm not—" He placed a finger over my lips. "Don't lie." My breathing quickened. His body pressed against mine made me dizzy. Everything about him unsettled me, consumed me. "Tell me to leave," he murmured against my skin. But I stayed silent. He smiled, his gaze triumphant. And that night, I knew I had just lost the first battle. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes either. But when his lips brushed my skin, when his scorching breath caressed my neck, I knew I was losing my grip. This dangerous game was turning into a storm, threatening to swallow my reason whole. "Let me go, Raphael," I whispered, my voice strangled. He froze, his gaze locked onto mine. "You don't want to leave. You're insane." A faint smile played on his lips. "Maybe, but look me in the eyes and tell me you feel nothing." My heart pounded violently. I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't deny this insane attraction, this fire consuming me whenever he was near. His fingers trailed along my cheek, then slowly down my arm, leaving a shiver in their wake. "You're playing with me, Isabella," he murmured against my lips, "but be careful. When you play with fire, you end up getting burned." And then, slowly, he stepped back. I stood there, breathless, my mind in turmoil. "Good night, Isabella." Then he left the room, leaving me trembling, trapped in a desire I refused to acknowledge. The following days were pure torment. Raphael didn't try anything. He watched me, provoked me with his gaze, but he never touched me. It was worse than anything. I saw him at breakfast, relaxed, reading his files as if my presence was insignificant. I saw him by the pool, shirtless, indifferent to my gaze, tracing every inch of him despite myself. And every night he came to wish me good night, a smirk on his lips, never crossing the line. He was driving me crazy. I knew what he was doing, he was flipping the game. Now it was me who watched him in secret. Me who held my breath every time he got too close. And he was savoring it. On the 15th day, I snapped. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, finding him on the terrace. He lifted his gaze from his whiskey glass, amusement dancing in his eyes. "What am I doing?" "You're playing with me." He put down his glass and stepped closer. "No, Isabella." He brushed my chin with his fingers. "You're the one playing with yourself." I opened my mouth to protest, but he cut me off. "Tell me the truth. Do you want me to kiss you?" I stayed silent. A burning silence stretched between us. Then he stepped back again. "Good night, Isabella." And that night, I realized he was winning. On the 18th day, I gave in. I waited for him in his bedroom. When he entered, shirtless, a towel wrapped around his waist after his shower, he stopped dead at the sight of me sitting on his bed. A silence, a long silence. "Isabella." "Shut up." I stood up and walked toward him. His gaze darkened. I placed my hands on his chest. His skin burned under my touch. "You win," I murmured. Then I kissed him. It was like striking a match in a room filled with gasoline. Raphael groaned against my lips and grabbed me by the waist. Our bodies crashed together in a feverish rush. His hands slid down my back, pulling me against him with a devouring intensity. We fell onto the bed in a tangle of sighs and burning touches. It was wild, uncontrollable, a battle between passion and pride, between hatred and desire. And at dawn, as he slept beside me, one thought crossed my mind. I'm falling in love with him. The morning after our night together, he said nothing. He stood there, silent, watching the sea through the bay window. I lay in bed, still caught in the turmoil of what we had just experienced. My fingers traced the blanket, brushing against the imprint of his body that had burned me all night. Then he turned to me. His gaze was heavier this time, darker. "You know, Isabella." He left his sentence hanging. I stared at him, still under the effect of the desire that had consumed me. "What?" He approached slowly, taking his time, as if each movement was calculated. You think this is a game, don't you? I sat up slightly in bed, but I couldn't hide the anxiety creeping into me. I knew he had noticed my hesitation. You haven't won yet. My voice was firmer than I had anticipated. A cold smile appeared on his lips. I think you're wrong. Before I could react, he seized my wrist and pulled me out of bed. I barely had time to react before he was leading me toward the door. Raphael, what are you doing? You belong to me now. I struggled to break free, but he was too strong, too in control. You're mine, Isabella. His voice was icy. And don't think this is over. A few hours later, I found myself in a stunning living room. The daylight filtering through the curtains emphasized the opulence of the place. Raphael didn't take his eyes off me. He was no longer the calm and unshakable seducer. He seemed troubled. You think I'm like the others, Isabella? I frowned. What do you mean? He abruptly stood up, his imposing figure moving with rare agitation. I let you play your games, but there's a much darker reality, Isabella. I slowly stepped closer, challenging his gaze. You kidnapped me. This isn't a game. He turned to me, his gaze tense. You think I kidnapped you for that? He stepped closer. No, Isabella, I never wanted this. I took you to test you, to see if you were strong enough to see me for who I really am. His words hit like punches. I didn't understand. I am what you see, Isabella. He ran a hand through his hair, visibly more agitated than ever. And I'm going to show you. He looked at me intensely, and something inside me shattered. This time he was no longer just a man, strong, powerful, but vulnerable, and it was that vulnerability that disturbed me even more than his strength. The next day, things took an unexpected turn. I found myself locked up again, but this time it wasn't in the luxurious villa. It was somewhere colder, more austere. Raphael was there with a man I didn't recognize. His face was hardened, marked by war. He seemed to be one of Raphael's associates, another pawn in his empire. What's going on? I asked, my voice trembling. Raphael didn't answer immediately. He slowly turned to the man in the black suit and spoke in a language I didn't understand. Suddenly, the man turned to me and stared coldly. It's over. The ground seemed to collapse beneath my feet. What? I wanted to scream, but my voice was broken. The man smiled, a cruel smile. You are nothing now. I couldn't breathe. Raphael's words echoed in my head over and over, like a cruel refrain. You're not the person I once knew. I was paralyzed, my heart pounding violently. The man I thought I understood, the one who had seduced me, manipulated me, was discarding me without a second glance. He had let me believe I was the only one, that what we shared was real. But in that moment, I knew he had never been sincere. It had all been a game to him, and every word he had spoken had been a mask. So why had he taken it off? I stood up furious, my fists clenched. I was not a puppet, not a toy to be used and thrown away when no longer useful. I ran toward the door, but it slammed shut before me. The sound of the lock echoed like a final judgment. You're not going anywhere. It was the man in the black suit. He stepped closer, his gaze as cold as the metal door. Raphael said it's over, but you're not out of the game yet, Isabella. I instinctively stepped back, my hands trembling. You're lying to me, I screamed. He shook his head slowly. You're the one lying to yourself. I had no choice but to face him. Raphael was gone, and he wasn't coming back to save me. He had abandoned me to this cold, ruthless world. But something inside me hurt even more than the physical pain. It was humiliation. The realization that I had been used as a pawn in a game where I didn't even know the rules. I glanced around. A window. A faint hope. But the man was too fast. He grabbed my arm, holding me in place. Don't be stupid. His grip tightened, almost pitying. You don't understand. You're part of the scenery now. I shivered at his words. I am not an object. I forced strength into my voice. He let out a disdainful laugh. You were, from the moment Raphael chose you. That was when an idea took shape in my mind. A risky one, but necessary. I knew I had to get back into the game, but this time I would play by my own rules. I turned to him, my gaze sharper than ever. I'm willing to do anything to get out of here. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Then do it. I took a deep breath. I want to see Raphael. The man hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. You think he'll save you? No, but he won't be able to ignore me if I go all the way. The challenge in my eyes was undeniable. He no longer had control. A few hours later, I stood before Raphael. He was alone, arms crossed, as if my presence was insignificant. But his gaze told a different story. He looked at me differently, as if he was trying to understand me. You wanted to see me. It was more of a statement than a question. I faced him, my heart pounding violently. I want to know why. He shrugged, impassive. Why what? I stepped closer, closing the distance between us. Why did you manipulate me? Why did you make me believe you wanted me? He didn't answer immediately, but I saw the tension in his eyes, the hesitation, that thin veil between control and humanity. Then finally, he spoke in a low, almost broken voice. I didn't manipulate you. I tested you. I looked at him with disgust. Tested? Yes. I needed to know if you could be more than you seemed, if you could understand what I truly am. His words hit me like a slap. But something else happened. A spark, a flicker of humanity. Raphael wasn't a monster. He was a broken man, with scars far deeper than I had imagined. He suddenly stood up. I never forced you into anything, Isabella. He stepped closer, his fingers barely brushing my skin. But everything you see here is the price of my survival. And I thought you could understand that. I felt dizzy. His gaze, his words, everything was a whirlwind of confusion and desire. I no longer had control. But a thought crossed my mind, as cold as the truth itself. I'd never been anything more than a piece in his puzzle. Raphael's words echoed in my mind like a bell, yet they felt as distant as the sea. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. He was staring at me intensely, as if searching for a secret I hadn't yet revealed. I no longer had control over the situation. Everything I thought I knew about him, about us, was collapsing into a storm of uncertainty. He slowly stood up, his movements calculated, as if every gesture had a purpose. He walked to the window, gazing into the night, lost in thought. You thought this was a test, didn't you? He finally said, his voice almost emotionless. I glared at him, ready to respond, but a chilling shiver ran down my spine when his eyes met mine. It wasn't a test, Isabella. He turned to me, his face hardening. It was preparation, a way for me to know if you could survive in my world, a world where I trust no one. I took a few steps back. His words hit me like a punch. What I thought was manipulation, a cruel game, was actually his way of staying alive. You were always just a piece of the puzzle, he continued, his tone growing darker. I saw you as an asset, someone who could help me build something stronger, to control what I started. But I thought... He paused, hesitating. He stepped closer to me. I thought you could be more than that. I thought you could... He stopped, his gaze drowning in confusion, as if his own emotions were overwhelming him. I didn't know how to react. I had believed him, believed in him. I had thought that everything we shared, every moment, every smile, every kiss, was real. But it had all been a masquerade, a means for him to secure his place in this ruthless world. I wanted to speak, but no sound came out of my mouth. He stepped even closer, almost too close, and with a trembling hand he brushed my hair. But the problem, Isabella, is that I'm not sure I can let you go now. A heavy silence fell over the room, suffocating. I swallowed hard, panic flooding through me. I had been a tool, a means to an end. But what he was telling me now, I couldn't bear it. He finally stepped away, his eyes filled with torment, with remorse, but also with an icy determination. You think you can leave whenever you want, don't you? He turned toward the door. But let me tell you something, Isabella. I froze. Every word he spoke paralyzed me more and more. I was never the man you thought I was. He stopped at the door, his back turned to me. And you are not the woman I believed you to be. I tried to approach him to understand, but he suddenly turned around. You want to know why I can't let you go, he said, his voice heavy with tension. Because you are far more dangerous than you think. And because you have a hold on me that even you don't realize. My breath caught. This month was a test for both of us, Isabella. He stepped forward, his piercing gaze locking onto mine. And now you can't leave, not without consequences you can't even imagine. A chill ran down my spine. You see, Isabella. He leaned in, his voice a whisper against my skin. It's too late for games. You are mine, and I am yours. I knew now that Raphael had taken control. He no longer needed words to manipulate me. Every gesture, every look, every silence, everything about him dominated me. But there was something inside me that refused to fully submit. A fragment of my will still screamed to be free. I knew that if I wanted to, I could run. I could escape into the night, find a way to disappear into the shadows and erase everything. But the more I thought about it, the heavier the idea of leaving became. The truth was there, right in front of me, like a mirror in which I saw myself reflected, lost and confused. I had never imagined that everything binding me to him would be so complex. His arms held me in an invisible trap, one so soft, so captivating. I knew he had captured me, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Every night spent with him had brought me closer to this truth, the truth I had initially denied. There were moments when he became almost tender with me. His kisses were so deep, so passionate, they left me breathless. But it wasn't just passion. It was as if he was showing me another side of himself, a more human, more vulnerable side. And yet, every tender gesture, every moment where he seemed to offer me everything, was followed by a threat, by control, like an invisible rope tightening around my wrists. Love, if it existed at all, was trapped between these two extremes. Passion and manipulation, freedom and a cage. I found myself juggling my emotions, feeling more lost each day. Raphael knew that I needed him, that somewhere deep inside I was irresistibly drawn to him. But every time he allowed himself these moments of affection, I reminded myself of the truth. He was not the man I had imagined. He was not my Prince Charming. He was a drug lord, a man for whom love was nothing more than a currency of exchange. I was alone, trapped in a whirlwind of contradictions. One evening, as he held me in his arms, his steady breath against my neck, I heard him murmur words that shook me. You know, Isabella, he said in a low, almost soothing voice, I never believed in love, but you're different. I didn't respond immediately. His words were like a delicious poison, intoxicating me while slowly destroying me. Do you want to know why I can't let you go? He ran his fingers through my hair, a strange softness in his voice. Because I think you've changed me. Yes, I'm a monster, but you're the only one who makes me doubt. A shiver of anxiety ran through me. I knew what he was trying to do. He was seducing me. He was letting me glimpse a future where maybe we could be together in some uncertain balance. But I also knew I would always be under his control. The thought of escaping tormented me at every moment. But every time I told myself I could erase everything, he reminded me that he knew every corner of my mind. He understood me better than I wanted to believe. And there, in that silent night, I made a decision. But it left a bitter taste, a feeling of betrayal against myself. I had found a way out. I had figured out how to escape. But there was a part of me that held me back. Raphael left me as usual, alone in the bedroom. He was probably overseeing something, a deal, some business. He was often absent at night, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That's when I saw it. The phone sitting on the nightstand. It was my ticket out, my plan, my chance. But the moment my fingers brushed against it, I froze. I knew that once I used it, there would be no turning back. Raphael would know. He would find me. And maybe then, there would be no escape. I'd found a way to break free. I held the key to my freedom. But did freedom come without a price? Was that price too heavy to bear? I heard the sound of the door opening. It was him. I slowly turned my head, my heart pounding. He looked at me, and a slight but meaningful smile appeared on his lips. You're not going anywhere, Isabella. Not now. He knew. He knew I was ready to run, to free myself from him. And something in his gaze told me that, of all we had shared, he had always known he would have me in the end, that I was the last piece of the puzzle he had patiently assembled. And in that look, I understood something. He had always held power over me, but that power was far greater than I had imagined. And even if I escaped, he would catch me. He would always catch me. I took a deep breath, glancing one last time at the phone before letting it fall back onto the table. Maybe it was never about running. Maybe I had already fallen long before all of this. But did this decision mark the end of everything, or just the beginning of a new kind of domination?
With 2 hearts in the dark, chasing whispers through the night, secrets buried in the stars, hidden in the pale moonlight. Every glance feels like a spark, every word just out of reach. We're dancing close but standing still, on the edge of love's mystique. In the shadows, in the moonlight, can you feel the pull so strong? Like a magnet, drawing closer to where we both belong.
The summer that changed everything. I never expected that summer to change anything. When my parents sent me to Aunt Margot's beach house for 2 months, I prepared myself for endless boredom, lazy afternoons, the sound of waves crashing, and long walks alone on the shore. But on my first evening there, standing on the porch and watching the sunset paint the sky in pinks and golds, I heard a voice behind me. "Well, look who's back." I turned around, my breath catching for a second. Noah. It had been years since I'd last seen him, but I would have known him anywhere. Except he wasn't quite the same. He was taller, his shoulders broader, his once messy curls now effortlessly tousled. His boyish face had sharpened into something more defined, but the smirk was the same, half amused, half teasing. "Noah?" I blinked, still processing. "Wow, you changed." "So did you." He stepped closer, leaning against the porch railing like he'd been doing it forever. I hesitated, unsure what to say. We used to be inseparable every summer, running barefoot across the sand, playing hide-and-seek in the dunes, sneaking extra scoops of ice cream from Aunt Margot's freezer. But time had stretched between us like the tide pulling back from the shore, and suddenly I wasn't sure if we were still the same people. "What are you doing here?" I finally asked. "My parents still have the house by the dock," he said. "I guess I never really left." I nodded, staring out at the ocean. The waves rolled in, steady and unchanging. Unlike us. "You staying long?" he asked after a moment. 2 months, I said. "Until school starts again." He whistled. 2 months in this tiny beach town. You must be thrilled. I smirked. "Oh, beyond excited." He laughed, and it was familiar, even if everything else about him seemed different. "You still hate the beach?" I sighed dramatically. "It's too hot, too sandy, and the waves are unpredictable." "Still dramatic, I see." He nudged me with his elbow, and something about it, the easy way he did it like no time had passed, made me relax. For the next hour, we sat on the porch and talked. About everything and nothing. About how my parents were too busy to take vacations now. About how he spent his time working at the local surf shop. About how the town hadn't really changed, except for the new cafe by the boardwalk that apparently had the best iced coffee. Better than the old cafe? I challenged. "Way better," he insisted. "I'll prove it tomorrow." I rolled my eyes but smiled. As the stars blinked to life above us, I realized something. Maybe this summer wouldn't be so boring after all. The next morning, I wasn't entirely sure if Noah had been serious about proving the cafe's iced coffee was better than the old one. But when I stepped onto the boardwalk, there he was, leaning against his bike, 2 iced coffees in hand. "You actually showed up," I teased, taking the cup he offered me. "Of course. Can't let you keep drinking bad coffee." I took a sip, letting the rich, sweet coffee coat my tongue. "Okay, it's not bad." "Not bad," he groaned. "You have no taste, Laurel." I rolled my eyes and we started walking along the boardwalk. The ocean breeze was cool, the morning air still quiet before the afternoon crowds took over. "So, what's the plan today?" I asked. "Nothing too exciting. I have work in a bit, but I figured I'd spare some time for my favorite childhood best friend." Oh wow, what an honor. He smirked but didn't argue. We sat on a bench overlooking the water, sipping our coffees, slipping into that easy rhythm again. No pressure, no expectations, just the quiet understanding that some friendships don't fade no matter how much time passes. That evening, Aunt Margot threw a barbecue, inviting half the neighborhood like she always did. The smell of grilled burgers filled the air, kids ran barefoot on the grass, and music played from an old speaker. I hadn't expected Noah to show up, but he did, hands stuffed into his pockets as he wandered into the backyard. Crashing family gatherings now? I teased, handing him a plate. I was invited, thank you very much, he shot back, stealing a fry from my plate before adding food to his own. We ended up at a picnic table, laughing over ridiculous childhood stories while my aunt kept nudging me and winking like she knew something I didn't. At one point, my cousin Claire, who was a hopeless romantic, leaned in with a grin. So, Laurel, is Noah your summer boyfriend? Noah choked on his drink. I nearly dropped my fork. What? No, I said quickly. We're just friends, he finished, still coughing. Claire just smirked. Aha. Sure. We ignored her and spent the rest of the night talking, the warm glow of string lights making the whole evening feel almost unreal. Like the kind of night you wanted to hold on to forever. A few days later, Noah and I were driving along the coast in his beat-up truck. The windows were down, the radio played softly, and the night air smelled like salt and wildflowers. He was quiet, which was unusual for him. Normally, he filled silences with jokes or stories, but tonight he just stared at the road, his hands gripping the wheel a little tighter than usual. What's up? I finally asked. He exhaled, shaking his head. Nothing. I waited. He sighed again. I found out my ex was cheating on me, he admitted, his voice tight. A few months ago. It sucked. I looked at him, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights. Noah. It's stupid, he said quickly, running a hand through his hair. I mean, whatever, right? People break up all the time. Love is just complicated. Too much effort for something that ends up hurting you in the end. I frowned. Not always. He let out a dry laugh. You sound so sure. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I just think you haven't found the right person yet. The one who won't hurt you. The one who will make it all worth it. For the first time that night, he looked at me, really looked at me. And for a split second, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I wasn't just talking about him. The sun was high, the waves rolling lazily onto the shore as Noah stood in front of me, arms crossed, that infuriating smirk on his face. Laurel, you seriously don't know how to swim? He asked, amusement clear in his voice. I groaned, crossing my arms. I can swim. I just don't like deep water. So, basically you can't swim. I smacked his arm. Shut up. He laughed. Okay. I'll teach you. Come on. With a reluctant sigh, I followed him to the shoreline, letting the waves brush against my feet. Noah waded in first, turning back and holding out his hand. Trust me. I hesitated but placed my hand in his. He pulled me forward, the cool water rising around us as he positioned himself beside me. Okay, he said, just float. I've got you. I tried, I really did, but the moment I leaned back, I panicked and grabbed onto him. Noah burst out laughing. Oh my God, Laurel, you're terrible at this. I glared at him. Maybe I wouldn't be if you weren't laughing at me. Okay, he said, still grinning. Try again. This time I pushed him hard. He stumbled backward with a yelp, splashing into the water. When he surfaced, his hair dripping, he looked at me with mock betrayal. Oh, you're gonna pay for that. I shrieked and ran, but running in water was impossible. Noah caught up easily, grabbing me around the waist and pulling me back. Noah! Let go, I squirmed, laughing as he lifted me slightly, threatening to dunk me. Oh, now you want me to let go, he teased. I don't know, Laurel. You might need saving. I elbowed him, managing to break free, but as I tried to escape, my foot slipped in the wet sand. Everything happened in a blur. I fell backward with a gasp, expecting to hit the ground, but instead I felt the solid warmth of Noah's body crashing down with me. We landed in the shallow water, him half on top of me, his hands braced on either side of my head. And suddenly everything stopped. The laughter, the teasing, it all melted away as I found myself staring into his deep brown eyes only inches from mine. His wet curls clung to his forehead, his chest rising and falling against mine, and I could feel the warmth of his breath against my skin. My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it. Noah didn't move. He just looked at me, his gaze shifting between my eyes and my lips like he was waiting. Like he was daring me. I didn't think. I didn't second guess. I just moved. My hand slid up to his cheek, and before I could stop myself, I pressed my lips to his. For a second, he froze, just long enough for me to panic. But then, his arms tightened around me, his lips moving against mine, soft but urgent, like he had been waiting for this too. The waves lapped around us, the world fading away until it was just him. Just us. The walk back to Aunt Margot's house was quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet that Noah and I usually shared, but a charged, almost shy silence. Neither of us had mentioned the kiss. I wanted to. The memory of it still burned on my lips, my heart still hadn't settled in my chest, but I didn't know how. What were we now? What did this mean? Noah walked beside me, hands stuffed in his pockets, occasionally stealing glances at me when he thought I wouldn't notice. I pretended not to. We reached my aunt's porch, the warm light from inside spilling onto the wooden steps. I hesitated before turning to him. Well, good night. Noah exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah. Night, Laurel. I thought for a second that he might say something else. That he might bring up the kiss. But he didn't. And neither did I. The next afternoon, Noah showed up at my door. We need to talk, he said, his voice softer than usual. I swallowed hard but nodded, stepping onto the porch with him. The ocean breeze ruffled his curls, but he didn't have that usual teasing look in his eyes. He was serious. I don't want to pretend nothing happened, he admitted, looking at me. I don't want to ignore it, Laurel. 'Cause I meant it. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. He sighed, shaking his head with a small, nervous smile. Look, I know we've been friends forever, and maybe this is crazy, but you're more than that to me. You have been for a while. I never wanted to ruin what we had. My breath caught. I don't want to rush you, he continued. If we're going to do this, I want us to be sure. I want us to mean it. His voice lowered slightly. So tell me if you don't feel the same, and I'll drop it. But if you do, just tell me what's going on in your head. I didn't know what to say. I felt something. I knew that. But this was Noah. My childhood best friend. The boy I had never thought of this way until now. Until this summer. I need to think, I said finally. I don't want to mess this up. He nodded, his jaw tight like he was bracing himself for rejection. Yeah. Okay. Take your time. And then he left. That night I called my sister, Natalie. Well, she teased. I knew something was going on. Natalie, I groaned, flopping onto my bed. Be serious. I am serious, she said, amused. Okay, tell me everything. I did. From the beach to the kiss to Noah's confession. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. Laurel, you already know the answer. I frowned. No, I don't. Yes, you do, she insisted. You're just scared. And I get it, trust me. But if you're waiting for someone to tell you what to do, I won't. You just have to ask yourself one thing. Does the idea of being with him make you happy? I hesitated. 'Cause deep down I knew. It did. I didn't wait any longer. I got up, grabbed my hoodie, and headed to Noah's house, my heart pounding with every step. I needed to tell him. When I reached his window, I was about to knock, but then I heard voices inside. His. And someone else's. I frowned, stepping closer. I don't know, man, Noah was saying. She's taking time to think, and I don't want to pressure her. I really want this to work. She's lucky, the other voice said. Not every guy would wait like this. I'd wait for her, Noah said softly. My breath caught. 'Cause in that moment I knew. I was sure. I didn't hesitate anymore. Hearing Noah's words, I'd wait for her, made everything clear. My fear, my hesitation, all the overthinking, none of it mattered. I wanted this. I wanted him. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stepped inside. Noah looked up, startled. His friend raised an eyebrow, then smirked knowingly. I'll leave you two to talk. He patted Noah's shoulder and walked out, shutting the door behind him. Noah turned back to me, standing up. Laurel. I took a shaky breath. Yes. His brows furrowed. Yes. I stepped closer, my heart racing. Yes, Noah. I want this. I want us. For a second, he just stared at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then a slow, breathtaking smile spread across his face, and before I could say anything else, he pulled me into his arms. I melted into him, my head resting against his chest as his arms wrapped around me tightly, like he never wanted to let go. You have no idea how happy that makes me, he murmured against my hair. I smiled, closing my eyes. I think I do. And just like that, the summer that was supposed to be boring became the summer I found love.
We're two hearts in the dark, chasing whispers through the night. Secrets buried in the stars, hidden in the pale moonlight. Every glance feels like a spark, every word just out of reach. We're dancing close but standing still, on the edge of love's mystique. In the shadows, in the moonlight, can you feel the pulse so strong? Like a magnet, drawing closer to where we both belong.
I suppose it all started with the sound of applause. Deafening, thunderous applause that seemed to vibrate through my bones. It wasn't for me, of course. It was for him. And that was the first time I realized how much I hated Alexander Moore. The spotlight adored him. It clung to him like a second skin, reflecting off his tousled and sparkling in his infuriatingly perfect green eyes. Every move he made on that stage was deliberate, every step graceful. The audience ate it up, their cheers growing louder with every practice twirl. Meanwhile, I stood in the shadows, my fingers clenched around the velvet curtain. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We were both dancers, yes. Rivals? Definitely. But I didn't expect the rivalry to swallow me whole. I didn't expect him to become my waking nightmare. I remember the first time we met. Auditions for the academy. He had shown up in a pristine black shirt and form-fitting dance pants, his hair artfully messy like he hadn't even tried. I, on the other hand, was still adjusting the straps of my hand-me-down shoes, anxiety gnawing at my stomach. I tried not to notice the way his presence seemed to shift the entire atmosphere of the room. Even the judges had perked up. And then he danced. I'll never forget that. The way he moved, like water, like silk. His arms curved with elegance, his legs extended with impossible finesse. He was everything I wasn't. And yet, somehow, I made it through that audition. My name was called right after his. Felt like a victory then. But the victories didn't last. Not with Alexander around. In rehearsals he was untouchable. Every instructor's darling. If I landed a perfect pirouette, he did 3. If I memorized a piece of choreography, he had already mastered it the day before. The praise was endless. Alexander, that was flawless. Alexander, you're a natural. Alexander, lead the group once more. And then there was me. Clara, keep up. Clara, stop hesitating. Clara, if you can't manage this step aside. I hated it. I hated him. But it wasn't just his talent that gnawed at me. It was the way he smiled so effortlessly, the way people gathered around him like moths to a flame. He wasn't just the best dancer. He was everything I wanted to be. And then, of course, came the ultimate insult. The lead role. The part one had poured my heart into. Months of aching muscles and torn ligaments, endless hours of sweat-drenched rehearsals. I wanted it. Needed it. And for a moment I thought I might have it. But the moment was fleeting. Alexander Moore will take the lead, the director announced, his voice cutting through the rehearsal hall. Clara, you'll be his understudy. Understudy. I barely remember the polite applause that followed. All I could hear was the roaring in my ears. Alexander, of course, accepted the role with a gracious nod. He even turned to me, flashing that infuriating smile as if to say better luck next time. But I wasn't going to wait for luck. Not anymore. The rivalry was no longer one-sided. He might have stolen the spotlight, but I was done standing in the shadows. And so my story truly begins. I didn't speak to him. Not out of fear, but out of stubborn pride. Every day I practiced harder, pushing my body past its limits. The whispers around the studio didn't help. He's already perfect. Benny's good, but she's reckless. They weren't wrong. I could feel it too, that need to prove something. So when I saw him nail the complex pirouette I'd been struggling with, my hands curled into fists. Alexander had been given the green light to attempt it on stage. I hadn't. But rules felt like chains. And I hated the idea of being bound. That evening when the studio was nearly empty, I stayed behind. My muscles ached, but the adrenaline kept me moving. I positioned myself in front of the mirror, determination burning through my veins. 1, 2, 3. I leapt into the air, aiming to complete the difficult turn. My reflection blurred as I twisted mid-air. The rush of power was intoxicating. Until it wasn't. The second my foot hit the floor, a sharp pain shot through my leg. A crack echoed in the silent studio. My body crumpled, the shock overwhelming my senses. I couldn't even scream. Just a strangled gasp. My vision blurred and I clutched my ankle, trembling. Benny. The voice was distant at first, but then suddenly close. Alexander. Of course he'd stayed late too. His face hovered above mine, concern etched into his usually stoic features. He didn't hesitate. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around me and lifted me effortlessly. It's okay. I've got you. The ride to the hospital was a haze. I barely registered the sterile white walls and the fluorescent lights. But I felt Alexander's presence beside me the whole time. He didn't leave even when the doctors examined my leg and confirmed what I already knew. A fracture. No dancing for months. Tears welled in my eyes, but I bit them back. I wasn't about to break again. Not in front of him. Why? I finally croaked, my voice trembling. Why are you still here? Alexander met my gaze, his blue eyes steady. Because, he said softly, you're not my enemy right now. You're just Benny. And for the first time I didn't know how to hate him. The ride to the hospital was a haze. I barely registered the sterile white walls and the fluorescent lights. But I felt Alexander's presence beside me the whole time. He didn't leave even when the doctors examined my leg and confirmed what I already knew. A fracture. No dancing for months. Tears welled in my eyes, but I bit them back. I wasn't about to break again. Not in front of him. Are you okay? Alexander's voice was low, careful. His concern should have made me feel better, but it only stoked the fire inside me. I snapped. Why do you care? My voice shook, but I didn't stop. You think just because you carried me here you're some hero? You always think you're better than me, don't you? Perfect Alexander, the studio's golden boy, always one step ahead. Must be nice. He blinked, caught off guard. Benny, that's not. Save it. I cut him off. I'm not some fragile little project for you to fix. I was fine before you came along. I didn't need your help. But even as the words left my mouth, I could see the hurt flicker across his face. And for a brief moment I almost regretted saying them. Almost. The next day I expected silence. No texts, no visits. Maybe that was for the best. But when the knock came at the door I froze. It was him. Alexander stood there holding a bag of takeout. I thought you might need some real food, he said, ignoring the tension from the day before. Hospital food is the worst. I wanted to slam the door. But the smell of warm pasta was undeniable and my stomach betrayed me. Fine, I muttered, stepping aside. He stayed for only a little while, watching as I ate in silence. He didn't force conversation, didn't try to fix anything. And somehow that made it bearable. Scene 2, Stories from the Studio. On the second day he brought stories. You won't believe what happened, he started, sitting on the chair beside my couch. Marissa tried to pull off the same pirouette you were working on. She nearly took out the bar. Despite myself I laughed. He grinned, clearly pleased. For a moment, it was almost like we weren't rivals. Just two dancers sharing stories. On the third day he showed up with someone else. Hope you don't mind, Alexander said as a familiar face appeared behind him. My best friend Lily. You idiot. Lily scolded me, though her eyes were red. You could have been hurt way worse. I opened my mouth to protest, but Alexander interrupted. She's already been through enough, he said quietly. She's learned her lesson. I blinked at him, surprised. No smug remarks. No backhanded comments. Just concern. And for the first time I started to wonder if maybe Alexander wasn't entirely the enemy I thought he was. Weeks passed. My leg healed, the cast came off, and soon I could walk without crutches. But something else had changed. I fell for him. It wasn't sudden. It was in the small moments. His unexpected kindness, his laughter, the way he looked at me when he thought I wouldn't notice. So I planned a dinner. Nothing extravagant, just something simple. A quiet place to tell him what I felt. I spent the entire day preparing, nervously rearranging candles and nervously second-guessing my choices. But he never came. The candles burned low. The food grew cold. I checked my phone too many times, the silence unbearable. And I had no idea why. The next morning he finally showed up. Benny, I'm so sorry, he said, his face pale. I wanted to come, I really did. But my girlfriend wasn't feeling well. We had to go to the doctor. She's pregnant. The words hit me like a punch. Pregnant. Of course. I forced a tight smile, pretending it didn't shatter something inside me. It's okay, I murmured. But it wasn't. Who leaves their pregnant girlfriend to care for another girl? Men are so unbelievably stupid. I didn't mean for it to happen. I fought it, denied it, told myself over and over that it was nothing, that it was impossible. But no matter how many times I tried to push it away, it was still there, lingering beneath the surface, growing stronger with every passing day. I had fallen for him. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't some grand, dramatic revelation. It crept up on me slowly, in the smallest moments. The way he made me laugh when I least expected it, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me, the way his hands lingered just a little too long when he helped me up. It was in the way he looked at me when he thought I wouldn't notice, in the way he showed up when no one else did. I should have known. I should have seen it coming. But I was too stubborn, too set in my ways, too determined to believe that he was still the same person I had convinced myself he was. He was supposed to be the enemy. The last person I should ever trust. The one I had sworn to keep at a distance. And yet here I was, sitting alone in the dim glow of my apartment, my heart aching with the weight of a truth I could no longer ignore. I thought about him constantly. Every time I closed my eyes I saw him. His smile, his touch, the way he made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. How did I let this happen? How did he slip past my defenses so effortlessly, breaking through walls I had spent years building? I had been so careful, so guarded. And now I was standing on the edge of something terrifying, something I couldn't control. I hated this feeling, this vulnerability, this helplessness. It wasn't like me. I had always prided myself on my strength, my ability to keep my emotions in check. But now my own heart had become my enemy, betraying me at every turn, pulling me towards something I wasn't sure I could survive. But the worst part? I didn't want it to stop.
We're two hearts in the dark, chasing whispers through the night. Secrets buried in the stars, hidden in the pale moonlight. Every glance feels like a spark, every word just out of reach. We're dancing close but still